All right, come in, have a seat. It is a packed show. There's the return of Reservation Dogs, a new Olivia Rodrigo album. We'll get to all of that with the group chat. But first on the podcast, the big story, Jimmy Fallon and the reports of a toxic workplace culture at The Tonight Show. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Listen, normally this is a day where we do our end-of-week group chat. And don't worry, that is going to happen. That's coming in a few minutes. But a big story dropped yesterday, and we kind of need to talk about it. Rolling Stone published an investigation about Jimmy Fallon and The Tonight Show, and it is, it's quite something. 16 sources, current and former staffers, allege a toxic workplace and also erratic abusive behavior by Jimmy Fallon himself. Shout out, by the way, to Christy Lee Yandoli, who wrote the piece before she moved to Rolling Stone. She was a colleague of mine at BuzzFeed News, and there she broke that massive story about the alleged toxic workplace environment at the Ellen DeGeneres show. Look, this Fallon story, it's a big deal, and my favorite person to talk about all things TV is here, Kathryn VanArendonk of Vulture. Kathryn, what's good?
Hello. I wish I were here under happier circumstances for late night TV work culture, but here we are.
I know. It's not the best circumstances, but also it's such a big story. What was your reaction to the story from Rolling Stone when it dropped first yesterday?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is the kind of story that is always both shocking and not shocking at the same time.
Yeah.
It is the kind of story that tends to percolate around in a lot of like whispered media gossip for a while before it finally surfaces. But it's really important to understand the distinction between a lot of media gossip and then an actual reported piece where somebody has done the work and put in the time and pulled together all the sources. And you never know what it's actually going to look like when all the cards are on the table. And this is a case where, as you're reading through, it is well reported, it is very carefully sourced, and there are enough voices with enough really upsetting stories about what it has been like to work there that you think like, yeah, okay, not a great one.
Yeah, listen, normally, like, if a story like that comes out and you have, like, 2 sources, you go, I don't know about this. 16 sources who just keep saying the same thing over and over again about that kind of environment, and you go, this kind of paints a picture of what it's like to work at this place. What stood out for you in terms of, like, the experiences that people were describing?
Yeah, so, we, over the past several years, have become aware that there's a spectrum of what these kinds of stories can sound like. The worst and most awful tend to be like actually criminal, right?
Yeah.
Where something has clearly like a prosecution is probably about to happen. The other end of that spectrum is like, it seems like a challenging workplace, and clearly some things were said that shouldn't have been said, but it's hard to pin down exactly, you know, how broad this was. This falls, I mean, it's certainly not criminal, but it absolutely falls in the sense of like, for lots and lots of people, for lots of years, this was a miserable, unsustainable workplace, and that was clearly being enabled by people above Fallon's level, because at this amount of people and with this level of misery and dysfunction, executives would have known that this was what was going on and have made a conscious decision that they were not going to try to change things.
So I want to come back to that workplace culture thing in just a moment, but also I guess it's significant to note here, hours after that story came out, we heard about a meeting also reported by Christy. We heard about a meeting that Jimmy Fallon had with his team. He apologized to them. He said, quote, "It's embarrassing and I feel so bad. Sorry if I embarrassed you and your family and friends. I feel so bad I can't even tell you." That apology came pretty fast, Kathryn, like same day kind of apology to his team anyway.
Yes. Yeah. And so for one, that does suggest that they are aware that this is fairly serious and that they need to address it, which is very good. It's also good that it happened, in some kind of like private. I think that apology was over Zoom. So, rather than just release a blank statement, they did try to talk to their current employees. Yeah. The other thing about that, though, is, I mean, who knows what the full content of that call was, but embarrassing you in front of your families is like not really what was happening there.
No.
It was in fact like years of being belittled and like crying in the workplace and having suicidal ideation, which is not quite the same thing.
No.
And the other thing is these are all former employees. And so although he was apologizing to current employees, there's this whole group of people who were not included in that conversation. So this does not feel like the end of that.
I find this story kind of hard, and I think the reason I find it kind of hard is because as with I think most people and their late night shows, you kind of develop this relationship with these people and their persona, the persona that you see on the screen. This happened with Ellen DeGeneres, right? Like Christie also wrote that story about the allegations of a toxic workplace environment at the Ellen show, and she pointed out in that story, you know what, like we don't necessarily have a gauge of what is a normal, quote unquote, workplace environment, because I don't know what is normal in a space that is like, hey, this is high pressure. This is daily television that we're trying to make. And like, this is watched by millions and millions of people. Is that a part of the problem that our sort of expectation of what a normal workplace is have shifted so much?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly an issue. And it is particularly an issue for a show like Ellen or like a Jimmy Fallon show where there is one person at the center of it who is relatively irreplaceable compared to anyone else, right? And so there's this sense of like, they're the personality, they're the important thing, we have to enable that. But it is also not like Hollywood has not been making high pressure, extremely watched, important rated shows for decades now, which is not to say those workplace environments were necessarily healthier. But the idea that like a healthy model of a workplace is something that has never been an issue before and can never be a thing that people can talk about and try to fix. I think that is a thing that Hollywood likes to tell itself, this idea that like we are a special circumstance for what it is like to work someplace. And to some extent, that is probably true. And to another extent, that means you need to create extra protections. You need to be extra careful about how people are living their lives as they engage in this industry. You
mean an industry can't just get a pass of being like, oh, it's normal to cry at work here. That's totally just a part of being at work. You can't just do that.
I mean, it seems like they have been able to for quite a while.
It does. Horrifically so. But also we should note that like Jimmy Fallon is someone who came up through SNL. And I think that's really significant because like Long Reads recently published this piece about Lorne Michaels, the longtime executive producer of SNL. Lorne Michaels is 78. He's been doing this for a very, very long time. The article brought up allegations of a lot of problematic behavior against him as well. I know you read that article. What do you think is the connection between Jimmy Fallon's days at SNL and, you know, the accusations or the stories that we hear about Lorne Michaels?
Yeah, I also really want to shout out Mo Ryan's book, Burn It Down, which has a chapter on SNL as well, and is a really great, larger examination of toxic workplace environment and these kinds of power imbalances in Hollywood and the kind of behavior it enables. And what I want to suggest here is that it is maybe not surprising, or at the very least worth noting, that Jimmy Fallon came up in an environment that suggested that this kind of behavior was okay. That when you're good enough, talented enough, important enough, your behavior does not need to have consequences, right? Which is a little bit of what Lorne Michaels has been able to suggest about the high pressure work of SNL. You're there every day. It's incredibly hard work. If you get it done and it's funny, nothing else really matters. And so if that's where you came up, it's not all that shocking that you would then replicate it in your next workplace where you have even more power.
We got about a minute left, but I just want to say, you know, this story comes out. These people don't have to go to work right now, because the Hollywood writer's strike is happening. So as a result, the Tonight Show is currently off the air. How do you think that affects how the story ends up playing out?
I would really, really hope that when they come back to the workplace, whenever that is, significant changes have taken place. But I think the reality is that this news story is dropping right now. It's going to be a big deal right now. Fascinating to see what the late night podcast Strike Force 5 is going to be like over the next several weeks.
That's the podcast with all the late night hosts. They're all hosting it together. I'm like, Jimmy's got to show up to that job in the next week or so.
A sudden must listen, am I right? But
yes.
But it also seems like there is a possibility, which I'm really concerned about, which is the writer's strike is not going to be resolved anytime soon. And by the time it is, this story will no longer feel like something that is crucial to address. It will be easier to snap back into previous routines rather than like, guys, this was a huge deal. Let's talk about it. And so it will be really worth keeping an eye on the stories that come out of this workplace and other late night workplaces over the next several weeks, but then also when they come back after the strike.
Yeah, the most surprising thing about this is like it's like a really big turn in terms of like the halo on the brand of late night host, because they start hosting the show and they say that all the proceeds that they raise from making the show, that Strike Force 5, are going to go to their staff who are currently being not paid because of the strike. And then suddenly this story comes out. I mean, there's going to be a big fallout from this. We'll keep watching it. I think we want to do a bigger, sort of deeper dive into late night TV culture. And for that, Kathryn, I'm sure you'll be back. But thank you so much for being here to talk about this right now. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
Of course. Kathryn VanArendonk is a culture critic for Vulture and regular here on Commotion. NBC has not responded specifically to Jimmy Fallon's behavior. But I'll tell you this, a spokesperson for NBC told Rolling Stone that Tonight Show is a respectful environment and that when employees have raised issues, they were investigated. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. Okay. We are shifting gears to another big story that is out there right now, and this is where we're going. Come on! That's Getting Back off Olivia Rodrigo's new album. The album is called Guts. It just dropped today, just a few hours ago, but you know what? Real ones know this, because real ones stayed up late into the night waiting for this. Real ones including Niko, Stratis, and Falen Johnson, who are right here with me. Falen, Niko, what's good, everybody? Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to do this.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. Okay, I'm going to start. Before we dig into this new record, Falen, can you just maybe remind us of Olivia's meteoric rise to pop stardom?
All right. So, in all honesty, I don't know a lot about Olivia Rodrigo. So,
Can't relate. Cannot relate, but go off. Continue.
Yes. So she kind of went through that Disney machine that, we've seen a lot of other pop stars go through, Selena Gomez, those types of stars. And she was quite young, and she started on a show called Bizarre Devark, I believe.
The way you said that with like the mystery in your face was incredible. I loved everything about watching your face as you said that. Continue. Sorry.
That's definitely how I feel. And then she went on to star in a show called High School, the Musical, the series.
Nailed it.
Yes, I know. And, through those shows, she kind of, she got herself in the writer's room and sort of like advocated for one of her songs that she had written to be on the show. So the song gets on the show High School, the musical, and it kind of goes viral on TikTok. And that's sort of the trajectory that her career has kind of followed. Like shortly after that song goes viral on TikTok, record labels become interested in her. And pretty shortly after that, she's signed and releasing singles that also go viral on TikTok. And then she just ends up breaking sort of record after record on Billboard charts, and becoming sort of like the voice of a generation.
Casual.
Yeah, she's kind of everywhere.
I mean, we say, everywhere, but like when Driver's License, her first big song, came out, it was so everywhere that even SNL was like, you know what, we want to get in on this action and like represent how large this song is. Let's play a bit of that.
Wait, what am I listening to? Driver's License by Olivia Rodrigo, man.
Sounds like it's just some teen girl singing in a room to the piano.
And that's the beauty of it. You got a problem?
What's this song like even about even?
Yes, it's about a girl getting her driver's license, but it's bittersweet because it's something she and her ex always talked about. That's what I guess based on hearing it for the first time right now.
I cannot tell you how many times I've watched that particular sketch, Niko. I love it so much. Okay, we have a new album. It dropped last night. You and Falen have both given it a listen. Did you like it?
Multiple listens.
Okay, go off.
I love it. I mean, I think she's a really fascinating example of like a new era of pop star, wherein, you know, she is very much a product of her origins. When you listen to her music, you can hear, and she's talked about it. There is, you know, I was reading reviews and profiles of her in like Vogue magazine and whatnot. And she talks about the music that she grew up on. You know, her parents were young. On her last tour, when she was touring Sour, she was playing Seether by Veruca Salt. And everybody's like, why are you playing a Veruca Salt song? Yeah. You know, and she was like, well, this is the music my parents listen to, and you can feel that, right? Like when Vampire dropped, everybody's like, oh, so you listen to Radiohead? Cool. You know, like, but she has all these influences, but she's not afraid to show them, and in fact winks and nods at them. And you know, this thing that I'm finding myself increasingly annoyed about with women in pop music is they're always measured against Taylor Swift, and they're saying, well, how are you going to be this famous? I apologize, you're wearing an Era shirt right now.
I'm wearing a Taylor Swift shirt as we
I
speak.
know,
Yes,
and I
continue.
knew I was going to mention this, and I was like, well, here we go. We're going to fist fight live on the air on
We
CBC.
don't have to.
But you know what I mean? Like, she's sort of being measured against Taylor Swift, and like, I don't think she is Taylor Swift adjacent. I think she's part of a new kind of thing, and because she's blending a lot of influences, and she's 20 years old, first of all. She's 20 years old. Yeah. And she's making really smart, clever, funny. She's really funny.
She's really funny. Yeah.
This is the thing that people don't talk about enough with her, is how funny she is and how like self-aware she can be, while also being self-aware of being young, which is a really hard thing to pull off, being like, I'm 20 years old. I don't know who I'm going to be tomorrow. And which she has said multiple times.
Well, there's a really remarkable thing, Falen, that she sort of developed as a style, right? Which is like this sort of almost speaking as she, you know, it's like all the thoughts seem like they're just kind of like coming off the top of her head as she's singing the song. You know, I really react to that personally. What did you think of the album?
I mean, I have to say, again, not an expert, but I liked it more than I thought I would. There were some songs that I think will definitely find their way into my Spotify algorithm. But yeah, like, you know, I've heard Vampire a few times now, and I quite like that. Making the Bed was one that I quite liked. But yeah, I definitely hear that influence of her parents' music, which I quite love. Even like I was Googling around looking at, like, you know, I know the plagiarism conversation around her work is one that has been happening, and a number of artists have come forward either saying this is just what music is. If you're Elvis Costello, saying like, yes, this sounds like this, but music is never new. We just reinvent things. But, you know, I saw a photo of her. Courtney Love was annoyed in 2021 because she had Olivia Rodrigo had done a photo shoot where the image looked very much like the album cover for Hole's first album, Live Through This. Yeah. But for me, as a person of that Live Through This era, I quite like it, and makes me like Olivia Rodrigo a little bit more, because I can find an in there, which I think is really interesting.
You hit it, because like it's not a pastiche. Like I think like we've been through long enough of like pastiche of like sort of 90s and early 2000s music that there's been a bunch of bands that feel like they're sort of making fun of that era. With Olivia, like it seems sincere. Like there's something sincere about the way that she's reacting to that kind of music. There's an honesty to how she's borrowing it and also like advancing it in a way, Niko.
Yeah, like it's part of her, right? This is part of her musical upbringing. This is part of her origin. And it is that entry point, right? It is like for people of my age demographic, like I'm assuming she has younger parents like me, like in their 40s maybe. And like, you know, it is an in for us as well. It is pop music that bridges a lot of divides in really fun and interesting ways.
Okay, let's play another song off the album.
And now you got me thinking 2 + 2 = 5, and I'm the love of your life, 'cause if rain don't pour and sun don't shine, then changing you is possible. No, love is never logical.
Hot take, Niko. Logical is the one. Like this is the one from this album. That's a bit of Logical off Olivia Rodrigo's new album, Guts. You said the thing that drew you to Olivia's music is that, you know, there's a sense of she's making music that resonates with both younger and older audiences. Elaborate on that for me a little bit.
Well, it was, you know, like we sort of were alluding to earlier, she is taking a lot of styles that are obviously like were sort of written into her DNA when she was a younger person listening to music. And she's talked about this in interviews and whatnot. And she is she's doing this thing where, like you said, it's not pastiche. She's not making fun of anything. She's earnestly coming from songwriting by growing up listening to music, which is how a lot of musicians do this, right? And she's not trying to make a Taylor Swift pop record. She's not trying to make a Selena Gomez pop record. She's trying to make music that feels like a natural extension of who she is. And I think that sort of naturally bridges a lot of divides for people, that brings in, it's a multi-generational sort of entry point. You can find a more straight ahead pop song. You can find something that has a punk rock element. Not to quote my own Twitter, but I did make a joke where I said,
your own Twitter. Why wouldn't you? Go ahead.
If they remade Josie and the Pussycats tomorrow with Olivia Rodrigo as the star, it would make $1 million by noon, and it's true. Like, it is very much of that. Like, you could hear a lot of these. And in fact, that first big single was like, this is an early 2000s teen, rom-com, whatever.
100%.
You could turn this into the soundtrack and it would,
Perfect fit.
It would break the world overnight.
Okay, we got to keep it moving, but I cannot recommend this album enough. I've only listened to it 2 times so far. I want people to have their own opinions about it. Anyway, we're going to come back to this. I want to talk about the latest episode of the final season of Reservation Dogs. It's a series that just dropped in Canada on Disney+. It is, of course, the acclaimed show from FX. It's a coming-of-age story about a group of teenage friends living on the reserve in the Muskogee Nation, Oklahoma. This episode is entitled Dear Lady, and some critics are kind of calling it required viewing for all settlers in North America. Falen, what is the premise of this episode?
Oh, well, I mean, full disclosure, again, I love this show. Yeah. And so really excited to see what they were going to do for this 3rd season. And they're definitely doing, more of the same, playing with sort of intergenerational themes, looking at sort of joy and trauma and how it's carried through our generations in a really lovely way. And so this episode, we see one of our lead characters, Bear. He's making his way back to his res after missing a bus, and he runs into Dear Lady, played by Gunnadil Horn. And so this episode sort of weaves together Bear's journey home as he hitches a ride with Dear Lady, and also Dear Lady's origin story, which focuses on her time as a young person in an industrial school, which is what they were often called in the States. We know them more commonly as a residential school, and sort of the traumas that she witnessed, and then how she became the sort of supernatural being that she is. So it's a great episode. Dear Lady episodes are always great.
Niko, what was your reaction to the episode?
I love this show. I was really happy that the 3rd season finally launched because I was jealous of everybody else being able to see it, because I think it is a show that translates youth in a way that I think almost no other show I've ever seen has been able to do. It's really funny while being serious, while telling real stories. I mean, it's a show that kicks off by being a story about youth suicide, especially youth suicide in isolated areas. I grew up in the Yukon. I know this world, and it feels very real to me. And as a person that also grew up in a small area, this all feels very real to me. And I've really liked this 3rd season having a lot of tones of home about it, and like what it means to have a home, and what it means to go away, and what it means to come back. And this episode in particular, I loved that it was really heavy hitting, but it never held your hand. It never stopped to over explain. It sort of required you to, if you didn't have enough context to understand, it requires you to do that learning yourself. It doesn't waste time over explaining. It tells the story it wants to tell in a very real way. It felt very moving. Like, I mean, I definitely cried watching this for multiple reasons, but it was just like, it is a really beautiful episode. It is really hard and really heavy, but it ends on an extremely sweet note where, Bear gets home to his reservation and, sees the hip hop duo there, and he has this conversation that it just feels very, very real. There's just a real sense of, it just feels like so tangible, the reality of it all.
Falen, we got about a minute left, but all 3 seasons of Reservation Dogs have received acclaim, and not just for the story being told, but also for the fact that it's predominantly Indigenous cast and team telling this. The series is coming to a close. When you think about its success, what does that make you think of?
I mean, I have a sense of pride. I know some people who have worked on the show, who work on the show. The storytelling is amazing. They've won all of the awards at Peabody. So there's a sense of pride, but also sadness, because what's next? We need more Indigenous TV. We need our stories to be told by us. I know that there are some things out there, but after the show ends, there's just not going to be that same kind of content out there for everyone to enjoy, not just Indigenous eyes, but I think it's especially important for Indigenous people and Indigenous youth to see themselves reflected in a realistic way that shows us and our stories and trusts us, like Niko said, to not hold your hand through it.
Niko, Falen, we are out of time. I wish we could just keep doing this truly and literally forever, but thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Niko Stratis is a podcaster and writer of the newsletter Anxiety Shark. Falen Johnson is a co-host of the CBC podcast, The Secret Life of Canada. Listen, that is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. I'm going to be here next week, so if you're going to be here next week, I would like it very much if we could hang out then. I'll see you then.